Hello everyone, and welcome back to my channel. I'd love it if you could leave a comment letting me know where you're listening from around the world. Also, don't forget to like and subscribe if you're enjoying this video. Story 1. I've been in the wrestling business for over a decade. I've wrestled in packed arenas, dingy warehouses, and even open fields, but nothing creeped me out like the night I found a locker room that shouldn't exist. It was a house show in a nowhere town in Texas. One of those old venues where the air smelled like stale beer and the walls seemed to groan under the weight of their own history. The kind of place where the ghosts of old matches seemed to linger in the rafters. The show itself went off without a hitch. The crowd was decent, rowdy but not dangerous. I did my match, took my bumps, and when it was over, I just wanted to find a locker room, grab my bag, and get the hell out. That's when I got lost. It shouldn't have been possible. I'd walked that hallway before, but now it seemed wrong. The overhead lights flickered, casting long, twitching shadows against the scuffed-up walls. The air had turned thick and stale, as if no one had walked through in years. And then I saw it, a door at the end of the hallway. It wasn't like the others. The arena doors were steel, painted with peeling gray or white. This one was different, old wood, warped and cracked, with rusted metal bands bolted across it. A tarnished brass plaque was nailed to the center, barely legible under the grime. I wiped it with my sleeve, and the words sent a chill up my spine. Superstars only. I hesitated. Something about it felt off, but curiosity got the best of me. Maybe it was a forgotten storage room or an old office. Maybe I just found a shortcut back to the main locker room. I reached for the handle. It was ice cold, like it had been sitting in a freezer. Micah told me to turn around, walk away, but I didn't. I pushed the door open. The stench at me first. Sweat, mildew, something else. Something rotting. The fluorescent lights overhead buzzed weakly, casting the room in a sickly yellow glow. Rows of lockers lined the walls, dented and rusted, as if they hadn't been used in decades. Then I saw the names. Owen Hart, Bruiser Brody, Test, Eddie Guerrero. I froze. These weren't the names of the guys on tonight's card. They weren't even guys still alive. I took a step back. The air felt thicker now, pressing against my skin like invisible hands. Then the whisper started, soft at first, indistinct, a rustling sound, like distant voices carried by the wind. I turned, searching for the source, but the room was empty, except for the mirrors. At the far end of the room, a row of cracked mirrors stretched across the wall. I expected to see my own reflection staring back, but I didn't. The mirrors showed someone else. No, some things. Shadowy figures stood behind each locker, half hidden in the dim light. Some wore wrestling gear. Others didn't. Their faces were wrong, blurred like an out-of-focus photograph. But I could see enough. Torn flesh, empty eye sockets, hands that twitched unnaturally at their sides. One of them moved. A slow, dragging step forward. The sound of something wet sliding against the floor. I couldn't breathe. Then, behind me, bang, one of the lockers burst open. Something inside scraped and clawed at the metal, forcing itself out. A hand, blackened and skeletal, curled around the edge of the locker door. Then another. I ran. I didn't think, I just ran. Out the door. Down the hallway. My boots slammed against the concrete floor, my pulse thundering in my ears. The air felt colder the farther I went, like the walls themselves were closing in. I turned the corner, and suddenly the arena was back. Bright lights, normal walls, voices in the distance. I stopped, gasping for breath, and turned around. The hallway I'd just come from was gone. No door, no warped wooden frame, just a solid, unbroken wall. I stood there for a long time, my chest rising and falling, trying to make sense of it. I touched the wall, pressed my palm against it, knocked once. Solid. I wasn't sure how long I stood there before I finally turned and walked away. The next morning, I asked around, "Hey, is there an old locker room in the back hallways?" One with the old lockers. Blank stares. A couple guys laughed. "There's nothing back there, bro." I dropped it. I haven't been back to that town since. But sometimes, when I'm alone in a new arena, I find myself hesitating before opening a locker room door. Because I know what I saw, and I pray I never see it again. Story 2. I don't talk about this night much. Maybe because people wouldn't believe me. Maybe because I don't want to believe it myself. But I saw him, and when I close my eyes, I still do. It happened in Chicago, sometime in the late 2000s. I was working as part of WWE's road crew, setting up for the show. If you've never worked a live event, let me tell you, it's a grind. You haul massive pieces of staging, rig up the lights, make sure the pyro won't set some poor bastard's tights on fire. We worked our asses off, and we worked fast. That night, we had just finished setting up the stage and entrance ramp. Most of the crew had gone off to grab food, but I stayed behind. Something didn't feel right. It was just a gut feeling, but I've learned to trust those. The air felt thick, stale almost, like an old room that hasn't been opened in years. I walked toward the entrance ramp, double-checking the LED boards. That's when I saw him. He was standing near the stage, tall and unmoving, just at the edge of the shadows. At first, I thought it was a prop. Maybe someone had set up a mannequin for a segment. But then I noticed the details. The long, black trench coat, the wide-brimmed hat that cast his face in darkness. It was the Undertaker's coat, but it wasn't him. The build was all wrong. Too thin, too stretched, like his limbs didn't fit right in his body. I let out a breath, shaking my head. Probably just a cosplayer or a fan who had somehow wandered in. I started toward him. "Hey man, this area is closed. You can't be here." He didn't move. I stepped closer. The closer I got, the more wrong he felt. The lights above flickered, casting strange shadows across the floor. I swallowed hard. The air had grown colder, enough that I could see my breath. He lifted his head, and I swear to God, he had no face. Not obscured, not hidden, just gone. A smooth void where his features should have been. I stumbled back, the blood draining from my face. My brain tried to make sense of what I was seeing, tried to explain it away. Maybe it was a mask, maybe a trick of the light. But I knew, deep in my gut, that wasn't the case. The stage shook beneath my feet. The rigging above creaked like it was about to collapse. Then he spoke, not with words, not with a voice, but inside my skull. "Leave before you join the others." It wasn't a threat. It wasn't a warning. It was a fact, a statement, like he already knew how it would end. I ran. I didn't stop running until I was outside in the parking lot, gasping for breath. My heart was hammering so hard I thought it might burst. The night air was warm, but I was shivering. I didn't go back inside. The next day, I asked one of the older crew members, a guy named Danny, if he had ever seen anything weird in that arena before. I didn't tell him what I saw. I just asked. Danny's face went pale. You saw him too. My mouth went dry. I could barely force out the words. Who is he? Danny hesitated. Then, in a low voice, he said, they don't talk about him, but he's been seen before. Only by the crew. Never by the wrestlers. Never by the fans. My skin crawled. What happens if you don't leave? I asked. Danny looked at me for a long moment. Then he shook his head and walked away. I never worked another Chicago event again. And I never, ever ignored a gut feeling after that. Story 3. I've been in the wrestling business for a long time. Long enough to see things that don't make sense. Long enough to know that sometimes the stories you hear whispered in locker rooms, the ones guys laugh off but won't look you in the eye when they tell, sometimes those stories are real. And sometimes they follow you. This one started back when I was still clawing my way up, taking whatever indie bookings I could get. I wasn't in WWE yet, but I was close. Close enough to taste it. Close enough to know that every match counted. That one good show in front of the right guy could change my whole life. That's why I didn't argue when they told me I'd be working Damian Dredd. I'd seen him wrestle before. He wasn't the best worker, but he had presence. The kind that made people uncomfortable. He was big, 6'4", maybe 6'5", lean but strong, with a slow, deliberate way of moving that made everything feel like it was happening underwater. But it wasn't just his size. It was the mask. Always the mask. It was custom made, stitched from black and red leather, the mouth jagged with crude, uneven teeth. The eyes were hollowed out just enough to show the shadows beneath, but not the eyes themselves. He never took it off. Not in the ring, not in the back, not even when he was drinking a protein shake in a corner before a show. His lucky mask, they called it, but luck had nothing to do with it. That night, the crowd was decent for an indie show. Maybe a couple hundred people packed into a gymnasium that smelled like old sweat and stale popcorn. The lights were dim, flickering every now and then, like the building itself didn't want to see what was about to happen. We went through the match as planned. He worked stiff, his strikes heavier than they needed to be, but I didn't care. I gave it right back. The crowd ate it up. I hit my finisher, a running knee to the face, and went for the pin. 1, 2, 3, and then the screaming started. It wasn't Damien. It wasn't the crowd. It wasn't any sound I had ever heard in my life. It came from the mask. High-pitched, raw, a shredding noise like something was being ripped apart from the inside. The whole arena went dead silent, like someone had sucked the air out of the place. The ref scrambled backward, eyes wide, mouth moving but no words coming out. Damien didn't move. I got on my feet, hands shaking, my stomach twisting in a way that had nothing to do with exhaustion. Then, slowly, painfully, he sat up. But something was wrong. His body jerked unnaturally, like he wasn't controlling it. His arms twitched, his neck snapped to the side with a sickening pop. And when he turned his head toward me, I realized the mask was moving. Not shifting, not sliding, moving. The stitched mouth opened and closed, as if something beneath it was gasping for breath. I took a step back. Damien, or whatever was inside of him now, took a step forward. His whole body convulsed, his shoulders heaving like something was fighting its way up his throat. Then he spoke, but it wasn't his voice. It was deep, guttural, layered. The mask chooses. I tried to move, but my legs felt frozen. You shouldn't have one. I ran. I shoved past the ref, past the stunned crowd, bolting for the backstage area like a damn coward. I didn't stop to grab my bag, didn't even change out of my gear. I just got in my car and drove. I don't remember getting home. The next day, I called the promoter to ask what the hell had happened. He sounded weird, off. Said Damien never came to the back after the match. Said when they went to look for him, he was gone, like he had never been there at all. No one ever saw him again. For a while, I convinced myself it was some kind of stunt, a weird gimmick, a twisted joke, something he had planned. Maybe he was sick, maybe he had a breakdown. Maybe I imagined the whole thing. I almost believed it, until the package arrived. It showed up at my gym a few weeks later. No return address, just a plain brown box, sealed with packing tape. Inside was the mask. It looked the same, black and red leather, jagged, uneven teeth, hollowed out eyes. But it wasn't the same. It smelled like sweat, like blood, like something rotten. And when I picked it up, just for a second, I could have sworn it was warm. I burned it that night, took it out to the woods behind my apartment, doused it in lighter fluid, and set the damn thing on fire. I watched it burn until there was nothing left but ash and the stink of something old and dead. And that should have been the end of it. But some nights, when the world is quiet, when I'm lying in bed with nothing but my own breath in the dark, I swear I can still hear it. That high, ragged, inhuman scream. Like it's still out there. Like it's waiting.